The Pest by J. Elliott Davis. It was introduced to Mr. Eldridge by Misty, his secretary in the interview. His tie was thin and greasy. I considered his shoes also to be in extremely poor taste, and in truth, I hadn't been properly briefed on the exact duties of my assignment. The job had seemed at first an excellent opportunity. After all, I'd been idle for some time and craved a change of pace. Things were slow and times were tough, yet I enjoyed a certain popularity at the office due to my punctuality, hard work, and positive attitude. "Pleased to meet you," I said. A painful contest of grips then ensued. Therese Misty, who had been blushing somewhat unprofessionally, rubbed her own right hand. It appeared to be swelling. "Well, that'll do then." We left, and Mr. Eldridge said that he was hungry. I therefore made mention of the leftover spaghetti at my house, and we proceeded forthwith to consume it. The man's eating habits, however, are disgusting. I was forced to excuse myself from the table at a point very early in the meal, leaving the fiend to his indecent monkey business there in my dining room. I marched directly to a payphone down the street. It was my intention to contact Misty, inform her of my sudden concerns, and escort Mr. Eldridge back to the office before it had closed for the evening. I meant to explain that I had thought the job another good chance to prove my worth, and perhaps gain a salary increase, yet had found myself unprepared for the realities of social work. An unfamiliar field for me. There was no answer, so I left a message. I returned home to find my client hard at work on the dishes. "Thank you," I said weakly, noticing a spot of sauce on his collar. Feeling tense and entirely drained, I then retired to my room for a short nap. I find the midday rest imperative to maintaining a good energy level, and will usually lay in bed for about 10 minutes before drifting off, provided I'm tired enough and there are no annoying distractions keeping me from sleep. Mr. Eldridge stayed busy in the kitchen for some time. I crushed the pillow about my head and rubbed my feet together beneath the blankets, then felt a bug on my ankle and sat up. Pulling back my pant leg, I saw that it was a flea. Ha! Although the fellow did turn the water off at a point, he continued with his insufferable ruckus so that I could not keep my eyes closed for more than 5 seconds at a time. I noticed a bit of mold in the corner. A cobweb near the windowsill fluttered loose at that moment. Something stung my wrist. Oddly, there was nothing there. Someone somewhere screamed. I put on my shoes and smoked a cigarette, heard the neighbors outside having a chat, and decided to again try Misty at the office. "Eric," said Frank as I passed by his porch, "Hello," I said. He then whispered something to John as I headed back to the payphone. "Why don't you pick up? Answer, damn you." "There he is," said John as I passed by the two again. "Hi." Mr. Eldridge had by then moved to the living room. He was listening to an excellent selection arranged and composed by Carl Holmgren. Something about the usually soothing melody was at that moment, however, extraordinarily taxing on my nerves. "You've got it on the wrong speed, you fool." He stared at me as though I were the devil himself. "Why are you looking at me like I am a monster, Mr. Eldridge?" "I'd like to make a phone call," he said, rudely changing the subject. "My phone was disconnected yesterday. There is a payphone down the street." "They said you'd have a phone." I had, in fact, failed to inform the agency of my situation. It occurred to me that Misty might have been trying to call the old number at that moment. "Well, I don't, unfortunately." Mr. Eldridge headed for the door. "Where are you going?" "To use the phone." "Wait a minute." "What?" "Will you be calling the office?" "No." "I see." He left. I looked at the clock. It was 5:30. Again I heard a scream in the distance, pulling back the curtain and peering outside for some clue. I saw two cats in the street. They stared at each other mysteriously there. No other activity was visible anywhere. I straightened the house, took out the trash, dusted, did a bit of laundry, then sat by the window with a cigarette. It was dark outside. A train approached. I considered that Mr. Eldridge had been absent from the scene for entirely too long. Even at a snail's pace, a walk to the phone could not possibly occupy over 5 minutes of one's time. Of course, I had assumed the fool could figure the way. But what if he'd gone instead toward the river? I was distracted from this reverie by the squeaking of wheels and bashing together of cars as the beastly engine came to a halt before my window. There was a knock on the door. I had, of course, expected Mr. Eldridge. Instead, I discovered a boy with a shovel there on the porch. "What can I do for you?" "Do you need your sidewalk shoveled?" I'd cleared the walk myself but a few hours earlier, and there had not been a flake of snowfall since. "It's already been done." "I can do the whole thing for $10, he said, gesturing absurdly toward the snow-free surface. The influx of such pesky door-to-door goers in wintertime is not unusual. Perhaps in other neighborhoods, the bankruptcy of Iceland Foods, a pie plant, however, had a real impact on the peace and quiet I'd enjoyed. The area had in fact become a bit of a slum. I noticed a man in a pickup idling across the street. I thought to myself and said, "Sorry, no." The stupid boy just stood there staring. "Go away." I shut the door. father and son then roared off in the truck directly toward noisome other stranger. A man or woman, perhaps, attempting to enjoy a pleasant evening at home, alone, without unsolicited interruption. I sat ruminating on the couch for some time, then looked in my wallet. Scarcely money there for cigarettes. My wrist itched. The walls were closing in. At 2 o'clock a.m., I was awakened by a thud. I'd been dreaming of beautiful landscapes. Sitting upright on the couch, I found myself surrounded by the mundane, ugly fixtures of my existence. A chipped ashtray, a lamp with no shade, a telephone with no tone, a television, dirty carpet, old curtains. Still a bit confused, I strained my hearing towards the porch. "Eric," came the cry of Mr. Eldridge. I stood, threw open the door, and angrily demanded, "Where have you been?" What was I supposed to do? "Well, I'm going to bed. Good night," I announced, admitting the drunkard into my home. I felt more or less obligated to do so under the circumstances. In the morning, I was awakened by more furious activity in the kitchen. "Morning. Coffee?" "Thank you, Mr. Eldridge. How are you feeling?" He shrugged his shoulders and tipped over the ashtray. Holding my tongue, I watched him sweep up the butts with his index finger and a book of matches, placing them shakily back in the glasswork. Of course, his nervousness was, for the most part, due undoubtedly to the wholesale boozing and carousing in which he'd been engaged in the night before. "Thank you, Mr. Eldridge." He then headed unsteadily for the turntable. "What are you doing?" He held up a record and made an uncertain movement toward my listening device. Although irritated, I moved my upper body somewhat forward so as to indicate approval. I didn't care for his choice of music first thing in the morning. Nevertheless, his selection, the drumming of nations at war, had certainly cost me a dear amount of money. It was, in fact, the most expensive record in my collection. A shiver went down my spine as he pulled the vinyl from its sleeve with a quick swish. Then he seemed to have some trouble with the setting. There was a loud buzz. This lasted only a moment, and Mr. Eldridge soon had the record turning without sound. All that remained of the maneuver was a careful placing of the needle arm upon the spinning disc itself. In any case, my client stood there fidgeting with buttons, knobs, hinges, and switches, and there I felt I should leap from my very flesh. Finally, with a spastic lurch, he scratched the needle over the entire radius of it, so that the record was effectively rendered valueless in an instant. "Clumsy idiot!" I screamed, suddenly losing all control of my body. "What, oh God, have you done?" It was particularly wet and cold that day, as I recall, having rushed out of the house in unbuckled winter boots, and without a proper coat. I soon found myself knee-deep in heavy, fresh snow. They continued dumping down in great heaps as I returned to the phone. Stabbing winter winds blasted through my flimsy, unsuitable clothing. Car tires flung slush in every direction as they passed. clenching my fist and grating my teeth, moaning and rubbing my hands together, cursing, spitting, shaking, and stomping my shoes. I determined to contact the office and relinquish my duty to the man, no matter what. Entering a gas station to obtain change for the phone, I slid forward at once and nearly broke my neck there on the icy wet floor. Some freezing liquid entered a hole in my boot. I therefore leaned one arm against a sturdy rack and removed the thing from my leg. Losing my balance at a point, I made the problem worse by thoroughly soaking my exposed wool sock in the sludge. The counter person noticed this and said, "You there, be careful." "Sorry, thank you." Realizing my mistake, I endeavored to return the wet shoe to my frozen foot. This took time, however, and the rush of customers had meanwhile made things even more difficult. One woman offered me her shoulder for support. "Here," she said, patting her body near the neck. Thanks, I'm fine," I said, hoping she would take the hint and carry on with her own business. "Come on, honey, here," she said again, slapping the flesh above her left arm. "Thank you." And I tried to compromise, took hold of her coat, immediately fell sideways and splashed into the pool, submerging the entire left side of my body in filthy, freezing brown water. "Oh, honey, come on now, take my hand." "Please, just leave me alone." I rose, strolled with one shoe through the store, selected an apple candy from the shelf, placed it upon the countertop, and said to the clerk, "You should do something about that mess by the door." Then, "Just this," I said, shifting the weight from my wet left foot to the dry right and gesturing clearly to the candy piece. I was set to reeling once more when a stout woman bashed me from her path with a massive hip and proceeded with her own silly purchase as though I didn't exist. Someone snickered. Another man laughed out loud. I was beginning to feel really foolish. Meanwhile, the heavy-set hag had begun to study various items near the counter, picking up some, asking stupid questions about others, finding fault and putting them back, or expressing satisfaction and adding them to her increasing heap. She really seemed to enjoy the annoyance she caused to all in the store, and I waited patiently as she bought a lottery ticket, lost, then played again and won $2. Luck eluded her several times more, and she finally moved on, at which point I pressed up to the counter again with my dollar stretched forth. There was a hot burst of breath on the back of my neck. A man yelled, "5 on 1," and pushed rudely past. Other customers did the same. A line had formed out the door. I could stand it no more, and I left. It took me nearly an hour and much walking and inclement weather without proper winter attire to at last get change for the payphone. The office number had been disconnected. Later in the week, I found the agency had vacated their 5th floor suite in the upside-down building, as it is called, due to its unusual shape. Nevertheless, I continued receiving my checks in the mail on the usual Tuesday. The money was good, but I'd caught a nasty flu, so could not enjoy the fruits of my labor. And the chronic black splotch had appeared near the base of my right thumb, and this slowly but steadily spread until it was the size of a quarter, a spider bite, I assumed. My arm was unusually bruised, and I began to lose feeling in portions of it. As it became more and more difficult for me to get around the house, I was too dizzy and weak to safely move from one end of it to the other. Mr. Eldridge was persuaded to take over my bedroom until the sickness passed. I wished at the time to be more centrally installed in the living room on the couch, and made good use of my waking moments propped up with pillows there on the sofa, creating an exhaustive form for the man to fill out. I considered it my duty to collect and assess as much information pertaining to my client as was possible during our time together, to prevent any distortion of the truth. I took special care in phrasing questions of highly personal nature. For example, at first glance, the section dealing with animal cruelty seems offhand and unimportant. Several trick questions, made especially revealing through clever use of the double negative, were even more illuminating. Mr. Eldridge answered every question incorrectly. I assumed at first that he'd done so intentionally to bug. When after intensive cross-examination, it became clear that his improper responses were genuine, I reassessed the data with my computer. This too had been moved to the living room. Entering his outrageous assertions into rows and columns, thus effectively isolating all peculiar idiosyncrasies in table form, I drew many startling conclusions that I thought might be of some use to the agency. My personal suspicions in no way interfered with an objective study of the man, and I am confident a review of my statistical work will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Mr. Eldridge was taught wrong. By placing them upside down in the cupboard, the man contaminated the rims of glasses that he'd washed, thus nonsensically reversing the aim of his task at the last possible moment. Although eventually cured of the repulsive habit, this former practice does illustrate the perfect confusion of his mind. "Bird," I said, when he called some flying thing a foul. "Football, Mr. Eldridge, do you understand?" His odd penmanship, the way he tied his shoes, and a strange pronunciation of the word "the." He said instead sometimes "the." For example, he might say, "Have you seen the remote?" Or, "Where is the ace of diamonds?" Even led me to believe he'd been deliberately misinformed by his parents out of spite, for sport, or perhaps because they'd been improperly instructed themselves. When I learned that they had recently been evicted from their rental unit on Central Avenue, I agreed to let them stay in my home as well, Of course, I'd been shaking with fever when Mr. Eldridge put the question to me, but it seemed the only admirable thing to do at the time, and I did wish to gather information from them. I hope to include a synopsis of the Eldridge family history as an addendum to my full report on the man. Of course, I was forced to relinquish my comfortable spot there on the couch, so that 2 additional guests might have some privacy in the living room. I relocated to the dining room for a time and spent most days stretched out beneath the table, as I was by then too sick to move at all. The reader may expect that I soon became annoyed with the new arrangement. Such was in fact entirely the case. Mrs. Eldridge could not be stopped from clopping around the house like a horse in her heavy wooden shoes. Whether storming about, slamming cupboards and doors, watching daytime television with the volume at full blast, or screaming like a banshee at Hank, her husband, a nagging witch, always found time to interrupt my important work beneath the table. "What are you writing in that little book? When are you cashing your check? What's wrong with the TV? What time is it? What's this? Where's my magazine? Who put that there? Where's the can opener? When are you calling the plumber? Where's Hank? What are you scribbling under there?" And so on, predictably. Hank guzzled beer from dawn to dusk, at which time he invariably collapsed unconscious on the couch, not to be roused again until attempting much later in the evening, and with a sorry record of success, to find the bathroom. Cigarette butts and beer cans littered the floor. The place soon reeked awfully, so I took up my sheet, notebook, pencil, and small blanket and moved down the rickety stairs into the basement, where at least I would be out of everyone's way while I recovered my health. I had to write left-handed, as by then I could not move my right arm at all. The hand, therefore, had become somewhat swollen, maintaining the shape and size of a softball. It then turned purple. My first night in the basement was a bit difficult. I discovered that an entire family of possums had burrowed through the crawl space and nested behind my dryer. If I approached or simply sneezed, the adult female would suddenly rush out, rear up her body in a terrific manner, and hiss at me so. The floor was extremely damp and cold, and there was no light. Fortunately, I remembered a candle near the stairs and was able to find a cardboard box down there to dismantle and sleep on. Although weak, tired, and in spite of my dead right arm, I created a relatively comfortable area for myself by the drain. I had to sleep a bit closer to the disgusting marsupials than I preferred, however, due to the fact that wind and snow was blowing in through a broken window at the opposite end of the basement. Mrs. Eldridge took time out of her day to bring me leftover scraps from the meals she prepared for her family upstairs. I found the remainders of tuna casserole and applesauce especially delightful, and craved an additional portion sometimes when I couldn't sleep. My health continued to deteriorate. I developed a serious chest cold and had fallen prey to some external parasite undoubtedly brought into my home by the creatures behind the dryer. Even in sleep, the infernal itching persisted. My skin was boiling. The Eldridge family wasted no time in housing every friend or relative who was down on his or her luck, while I lay helpless in the basement. I was further angered when they moved a ping-pong table in without first consulting me on the issue. The fun and games made it very difficult for me to concentrate on my work when I was awake, and almost impossible to sleep when I wanted to. Evidently, things got too crowded in the kitchen, so they brought the damnable thing downstairs, invited the neighbors over for a tournament, and established poker nights. Hank most often passed out on the bug-infested easy chair there by me in the basement. I might later awaken to find him in a futile negotiation with the stairs. Ultimately, he gave up or became completely confused. I don't know. Perhaps he believed he was standing in the bathroom doing his duty like a man. At a point, I became really uneasy about my arm. It was entirely discolored, and my fingers had become black and inflexible as burnt-up wood strips. I sometimes shook for 10 minutes at a time. I awoke from a fever one night for a moment to find Misty, my workmate, sipping whiskey with my neighbors in the basement. "Oh, my God," said Misty when she saw me there at last. "Eric, is that you? Oh, my God, it's so good to see you. Wow, I thought I saw your friend upstairs. What's his name? Do you live here? This is so crazy. What happened to your hand? Oh, my God. Hank, hey, Hank. Oh my God, ha ha ha." Misty was drunk, wearing the uniform of a loose diner waitress. "Ha ha ha, oh my God." The revelers lost interest in my plight as new drinks were dispersed from the tray. I couldn't focus my eyes. The room was spinning. Slipping in and out of consciousness, I had several imaginary interactions with the people in my basement. For instance, I thought I was winning at cards. I had a full house, 5 aces of hearts. Then my opponents became grinning devils, and I woke in my spot by the drain with a start. Then I dreamed that I was healthy. Misty was holding my hand and began to nibble my ear. A sharp pain ended the reverie, and I came to by the drain again. A trash can had been kicked into my head. At last I found myself in a sunlit field with the waitress. Unfortunately, she turned into a length of string. I came out of the delirium in a cold sweat. I was alone, the candles had been extinguished, and the opossums were helping themselves to an abandoned bag of chips in the trash near my head. I heard voices in the kitchen and dragged myself with effort to the foot of the stairs. "Help!" I called out. There was a thud, as that of a heavy boot descending with force on the kitchen tile. "Help!" 2 more concussions from above brought dust from the floorboards down into my eyes. "Hey, some of us here are trying to sleep," came a stranger's voice in response from above. It occurred to me that I'd been had. 6 weeks had passed with no word from the agency, and the checks were hardly recompense for the life I'd been living. I realized, in fact, that I would probably have to pay the money back at a point, as my employer was evidently out of business. Help me! Someone opened the door. What is it, Eric? Mr. Eldridge. What? I'm dying. Is it an emergency? The medical men were appalled to find me there at the foot of the basement steps with no cover, no pillow to prop my wasted body upon, or even socks to conceal my frostbitten feet. I was given morphine for the raging pain in my arm, a sedative, as I could not be stopped from screaming, and a healthy dose of vitamins intravenously in the ambulance on my way to St. Mary's. I regret to say that my arm was amputated at once. The loss of this particular appendage was quite a shock, and I was surprised when they released me 48 hours after the unnecessary decapitation. Hank met me in the waiting room. He'd come to help me safely home. Too weak to stand when the public transport splashed to a halt by the bus bench, I had to be carried aboard and was strapped to a seat so as not to endanger myself or anyone else along the way. Excuse me, the driver didn't seem to hear. Excuse me, driver. Sir, what can I do for you? That was our stop. What? That was our stop. Hank was snoring away at the back of the bus. I'll have to let you off at the Larson, and he spoke into the microphone. Somebody wake him up. Then to me, what's his name? Hank. Hank, rise and shine, Hank. The transport came to a halt. Hank, hey, wake up. You waking up? Hank. Hank snorted, rose unsteadily to his feet, and promptly exited through the back of the bus. He then stumbled off through the snow without me. I think I can manage on my own, I said at length. You sure, mister? Yes, I said, unstrapping the harness. Careful now. Reaching the upper step, I fell forward and tumbled headlong from the bus at once. The driver helped me to my feet, and I made my way home. It took me some time to do so. The door was locked. I knocked and was greeted by a hellish growl, as I did not wish to come face to face with whatever new brood had bivouacked in my house while I was away. I crawled through the window of an adjoining room and landed at the foot of my bed on a sticky wet floor. I gasped, I groaned, I wailed and wept. The walls were spray-painted with obscenities. All of value had been pillaged. The rest was kicked about the place or lay torn to shreds in my previously warm and comfortable nest. A car horn honked. Mary Lou! The entire place quaked as yet unseen monster dog bashed about, barking and breaking things. There was another long honk. Mary Lou! Someone screamed again. More honking. First a quick staccato, 1, 2, 3, and then more tenacious applications to the device was made. Finally the blasted racket played unceasingly until a voice somewhere replied with a cry. I'm coming! What Mary Lou is this? I wondered out loud and called out, Mary Lou! Coming, she said again, thinking me, the driver. More stentorian barking and an explosive crash against my bedroom door sent me scrambling for the lock. which I engaged without delay and held firmly in place with all of my weight. "Pumpkin!" hollered Mary Lou, and the uproar ceased. I propped myself against the sill and watched her step onto the porch, followed by the thing. How can I convey the sheer size and monstrous ugliness of her freakish beast? It was the largest, most woefully malformed species of dog I'd ever seen. It is no exaggeration, all to say that its hideous head was the size of a lion's. Its enormous body seemed entirely out of proportion to the porch, an impossibility of flesh and bone and muscle upon muscle bristling with tension that shook the house with every twitch. Do I go too far when I insist it was the size of a grizzly, or perhaps a polar bear? I do not. But I cannot begin to describe its hateful face, which was absolutely unearthly in every way. It was a vision of death and destruction, a mass of horror beyond imagination. In truth, Pumpkin belonged in a zoo, or better yet, buried beneath a mountain of rock in a bunker of steel. Instead, it stood free in broad daylight without so much as a rope to restrain it. "Get over here," commanded Mary Lou, effectively directing the dog to the empty bed of a snow truck out front. She then climbed into the vehicle and rolled off out of sight. Considering myself alone and out of immediate danger, I decided to inspect the rest of the premises in order to form an accurate opinion as to the extent of the violence which had been done to my property. I opened the bedroom door. The antechamber was dark. I flipped the switch and found my business clothes brown with mange in a pile in the corner. Additional evidence led me to the conclusion that one dog at least had been housed in that area for some time. Every piece of glassware in the place was shattered, including all windows, mirrors, most light bulbs, my computer screen, and the tube of the television itself, which had been launched a good 15 feet from its living room perch to the kitchen floor at a point. Wet lengths of tissue bedecked the interior. All that remained of my sound system was a bit of speaker wire. The player itself was gone, probably sold for cigarettes and alcohol. Most of my records were missing as well. The rest had been broken to bits. I will not describe the bathroom or the contents of my kitchen sink. Can I express the anger I was enraged with? No, I cannot. In any case, I held steadily with my only arm to the wobbling rail and made my way downstairs to where Mr. Eldridge and his mother had begun another damnable game of table tennis. Where's Hank?" asked Mrs. Eldridge. "You witch!" I screamed, then spinning quickly toward my client. "And you!" Mr. Eldridge stood there staring stupidly. "I want both of you out." "Calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down. Get out of my house." "Who is that woman?" "Woman?" "Yes, woman with the dog, Mary Lou. Who is she? Why is she here in my house?" I became overstressed and lost my breath. The front door slammed shut upstairs. There was a ruckus above. Momentarily, Pumpkin appeared on the cellar steps. Its eyes met mine. For some reason I sat. Still it stood commanding the scene, and then made a menacing move in my direction. Feeling prone and extremely uneasy, I slowly rose to my feet again. Pumpkin grunted and began to growl. Backing away, I toppled the box and wine bottles crashed on the floor. The dog's body coiled as it prepared to spring. Time stood still and I remembered. Feed it your arm, my uncle's advice. We'd been chatting one day and I revealed that my greatest fear was to be mauled by a dog. He agreed it was a bad way to go, but said that boiling in oil would be worse. If you ever are in that situation, though, feed it your arm like this, he said, raising his elbow and balling a fist. Feed it this arm, see? And wrap this one behind its neck. Lift it up and jump. Jump and land hard on your chest. You gotta break its neck. Do you understand? Feed it your arm. The dog's body heaved. I shuddered. It roared. I screamed, whereupon Pumpkin soared toward me and attacked, sinking its mighty fangs into my leg, which I fed it successfully, for I'd but one arm to feed, and I needed to keep it. The monster proceeded to pitch and rock from side to side, to and fro and hither, and yawn like some insane machine. The pain was outrageous. Muscle and tendon were no match for the vice grip tightening upon my thigh, and the hideous crackling series of bops that announced the destruction of another limb. Pumpkin prolonged the savage assault until I lay maimed and completely unconscious. Moments, hours, days may have passed. I don't know. I came to in my bedroom alone with food and water near me on a tray. I blearily ate what I could, pushed the remainders away, then passed out from the pain again many times. One night, however, I came completely to in a pool of cold sweat. I saw Mary Lou sitting near me with her beast, which snorted gaily by my side as she massaged its horrid forehead with a stick. Hank appeared in the doorway with a cup of tea. Spasms of pain shot through the thigh of my left leg, bobbing up and down several times in utter confusion. I then remembered the amputation of my arm. I think he needs a doctor, Mary Lou. Shut up. Shut up, Hank. He'll be fine. And she leaned over me, parting two thin lizard lips slightly in a smile of sorts. Won't you, honey? The pain. A low sound then came from the body of the creature beside me in bed. A slow, deep, steady vibration increasing in frequency until it was clear to all the dog was enraged again. Soon the thing was lurching and growling in a terrific manner toward my face. Knock it off, barked Mary Lou, and the hound became as docile and friendly as a little lamb. Then in an awful flapping and smacking of wet black lips, Pumpkin flung the drool from its head and slopped a slobbering tongue across my chin. Good boy, said Mary Lou. Where's your bone? Pumpkin squealed and crashed about in search of its toy. Where is it? Where's your bone? Egged on by the jabs of its idiot master, the dog became completely confused. Then in the bizarre, garbled language of a frightfully excited maniac drunk with sudden dangerous glee, it moved its mouth about, weirdly making odd sounds, seemingly trying to speak. Failing to express itself sensibly, however, Pumpkin only barked at full blast, then lunged at my leg and whipped me across the room like a rag doll. Bad boy, Pumpkin. Go lay down. My leg, oh God, my leg. The lights went out. Manny, get a candle. Hank, where's Manny? Help. I had, of course, been drugged once again, so could not contest the additional loss of limb with St. Mary's. I do not believe the injury and consequent infection could have possibly justified such action. The thing is gone in any case. The food at least was very good. I enjoyed many gourmet meals there at the hospital, where I remained for several days, gaining a bit of strength for the long hop home. Eric, said Frank as I passed by his porch. Hi. There he is. John then whispered something to Frank as I made my way up the steps. Need a hand? I suppose you think it's funny. Sorry, bud. I didn't mean it that way. I'll be fine, thank you. Hey, Eric, Manny made some chicken, if you want some. I don't eat chicken. Well, if you want some, you can have some. Thanks, no. What about Mary Lou? What? She your girlfriend? No, I don't know any of these people. Everyone is leaving today. Yeah, I heard about that. Open up, I shouted, pounding the door with my fist. Now. Hold up, honey. Mary Lou whimpered from within. She opened the door and started to cry. They took Pumpkin, my baby. They took Pumpkin away, she wailed, coming completely unhinged. Good. Get out of my house. Welcome home, said Hank. Pack your things. No, just get out. I was losing my patience. Now hang on, Eric. I'll have every one of you arrested. Come on now, buddy. I know you're upset about the leg and all. The leg? Should I be? Would you be upset? Well, I wasn't going to tell you. Tell me what? Hank then handed me the eviction notice. Studying the document, I finally collapsed on the couch, held my head in my hand, tapped my foot, took a long deep breath, and tried to relax. So I guess we'll have to stick together now, Eric. Even if you don't like us, I know things turned out pretty bad. Please leave me alone. The two left the room in silence. Later, the sheriff arrived with a posse. We were ejected from the premises with nothing and with nowhere to go. The ride arrived at 9, and the four of us piled into Bud's rusted-out junk bucket on our way to the river. Extraordinarily depressed, I shuddered to consider myself entirely dependent upon the Eldridge family. It was then late April, so at least the weather was warming a bit, although it was of course pouring rain when we arrived at the bridge. Hank and Son gathered some materials for a fire, while Mr. Eldridge, Mary Lou, and I took shelter under the overpass. We were all thoroughly soaked through, as was the wood, which took hours to ignite. A bleak pink sunrise was already in progress by the time the fire got going. Bud had been good enough to leave us with a bottle of cheap whiskey and a pack of discount cigarettes. When these modest offerings had been consumed, the desperate nature of our situation began to really sink in. I rested my head on a rock and stared at the river for a while. "Well, here we are," said Mrs. Eldridge. No one added to the woman's insipid observation. Any ordinary man might have given up. I have never, however, been a quitter. I decided to make the best of a bad situation. I sat up, threw another log on the fire, warmed my hand and foot near the flames for a while, and considered the brightness of the sun, by then blazing brightly above the horizon. A bird chirped. The Eldridge family and their satellite, Mary Lou, appeared to be sleeping. I found a good stick to lean on, so stood for a time there by the fire, testing my balance, feeling restless at length. I made my way through some weeds up the slope. This was not easy, but I proceeded with increasing confidence away from the sleepers. Hopping over an embankment into the woods, I plied forth with new determination. Morning lilies bloomed, a bumblebee flew by, an orange cat took an interest in my lurching movements through the brush and followed. "Here, kitty, kitty," I said, and the fellow leapt forth, instantly rubbing his body along my leg and purring happily in the day's first hot ray of sunshine. "Hey there, little guy." And he redoubled his affection, smashing his face against my fingers and sniffing my shoe. I might have stayed longer with the friendly animal, but pangs of hunger propelled me forth toward the city at once. I passed through some trees and arrived at Wilson Park, where I caught my breath on a bench. The joggers jogged and the bikers biked by, a bit taken aback, I suppose, by the sight of a man with half the normal number of arms and legs, unassisted alone with but a crude stick for a crutch. A smoker approached. "Young man." "Yes, sir." "Spare a smoke." "Sure." "Thanks. Nice day today." "Yeah," he said, extending a light. Suddenly, finding myself in the proper mood for conversation, I said, "And where, if you don't mind my asking, would you be headed on this fine morning?" "Well, sir," he said, "I'm on my way to work." "Work? Ah, where's work?" "Lou's." "Diner?" "Yup." "Then you know Misty." He shrugged his shoulders, inhaling blue smoke and spitting a bit of tobacco from his lip. Hitting my cig again, I said, "That Misty?" "Yup." An uncomfortable silence ensued. "Well, nice talking to you, mister." "Thanks for the smoke." "Tell you know who," I said hello. "Sure, what's your name?" "Eric." He stretched out his right hand, then quickly extended the left instead. "Nice to meet you, Eric. I'm Sal," he said. "Salvador?" "That's right." "Don't work too hard." "Nope." Feeling refreshed, I basked for a moment there in the light, observing innumerable dewdrops on a million blades of grass, a butterfly in a tree with 2 leaves. I listened with renewed enjoyment to the music of 1,000 morning sounds, children's laughter, the swish and rumble of cars and trucks, a bike bell, the beeping of a bus backing up, for I was free of Mr. Eldridge and his family at last. It might be assumed that I soon returned to the morbid pondering of a recently dismembered man. This was not so, however, for I appreciate a challenge as such and saw the handicap as but another small obstacle to overcome in the long struggle of life. In fact, over the course of the next several months, I strengthened my right leg to such a point that I was able to get around almost as swiftly as before. My uncle agreed to take me in for a time and even purchased the prosthetic limbs that I desired. I have since paid him back for the favor in full, and we joke about the old days now and again over a drink at the bar by his house. Fortunately, the man and I are of a similar shape and size, so I fit nicely into the suit that he gave me. He found the color black a bit morbid and rarely wore it, whereas I'm partial to the shade myself and don it often to this day. After much arduous walking from one end of the town to another, I was eventually employed full-time licking envelopes at a mailing house downtown. They paid me well, but the work was tedious and left a bad taste in my mouth. One day, I noticed another worker with a small sponge and a bit of water engaged in the same activity. I now employ this method alone for larger jobs. I soon had enough money to rent a modest room close to work, just around the corner from Lou's Diner, consequently, where I often take meals and have friendly conversation with my former workmate, Misty. Salvador is an excellent cook, and Lou's fish and chips is exquisite. The signature soup, bread, and salad combination is top-notch too. I should end my narrative now, as there isn't much left to say except that I saw the Eldridge family on a bus with Mary Lou about 2 weeks ago. I hadn't noticed them sitting midway back. Having seen me there first at the front of the bus, Hank headed for me in my seat straight away. "Eric!" I then turned and saw the others waving cheerfully behind him. "Good to see you," he said, sitting beside me and giving me a friendly pat on the back. We then had a bit of a chat, and Hank brought me up to speed on the Eldridge family situation. I was on my way to meet my uncle at the bar, and we'd stopped in front of King's Tavern. I became really uneasy when my former house guest followed me down the steps of the bus. Evidently, Mr. Eldridge had been placed in a new home, quite near my favorite brew house. The others were staying there temporarily, it seemed. In a firm tone of voice, I then bid them good night, slipped inside, and quenched my thirst with a pint. My uncle and I still met every now and again for a drink, as I've said. King's, however, is a bit pricey. We now frequent another pub. O'Reilly's is closer to home and more convenient for us both.